"How long are you going to keep me waiting?" barked a man at the front desk, his tone dripping with entitlement. "I'm a surgeon with no time for this nonsense." I froze mid-step. That voice. Sharp, impatient, unmistakable. I glanced over to see a tall man in a crisp white coat leaning over the reception desk, his eyes glaring at the young receptionist, Rebecca. "I'm sorry, sir, we're running a bit behind," she stammered, looking flustered and out of her depth. He slammed his hand down on the counter. "Behind? I have patients to see." Standing there, I felt a chill slither down my spine. I knew that outburst, that face, all too well. It was Greg, my ex-husband. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment I considered turning and walking straight out of the clinic. But then I remembered why I was here. I placed a hand gently on my growing belly and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had to stay. I moved towards the desk, flashing Rebecca a supportive smile. "Excuse me," I said softly, "I have an appointment." Greg spun around, his eyes landing on me. The recognition flared, then a smirk stretched across his face. "Emily?" he said, drawing out the name. His eyes swept over me, from my face down to my bump. Rebecca took my details in hurriedly, and I could feel Greg's eyes burning into the side of my head. Memories of his rage, those nights of feeling trapped and terrified, crashed through my mind, but I stood my ground. "I see you've moved on," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Pregnant, huh? And at your age?" He laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the quiet clinic. I squared my shoulders, refusing to let him see me falter. "I'm doing great," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "and I'm happy." "Well," he said, folding his arms, "good for you, but don't think for a second that this," he gestured to my bump, "means you've escaped me easily." Just then, the clinic door opened, and in walked Ethan, my husband. He spotted me instantly and made his way over, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Hey, there you are," he greeted, then his smile faded as he noticed Greg beside me. "Greg," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "this is Ethan." Greg's smirk widened as he slowly looked Ethan up and down. "Nice to meet the latest Mr. Emily." Ethan stepped closer, his arm naturally coming around my waist. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, directing his gaze towards Greg. "Oh, everything's just peachy," Greg said, his tone mocking, "just catching up with an old friend." Ethan's grip tightened slightly on me, a reassuring presence. "Emily, do you want to sit down?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Greg. I nodded, gratefully. As we moved to the waiting area, Greg called out, "I hope you're ready for what's coming, Emily. Let's just say I'm not done." Sitting down, I tried to calm myself. Ethan looked at me, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" "I will be," I said, leaning into his embrace. "I will be." Back home, I tried to shake off the encounter with Greg. The memories, however, refused to stay buried. His smirk, those piercing eyes, they took me back to the nightmare that was our marriage. "Emily, you know I only want the best for you," Greg used to say, moments before his temper would flare. Those words, spoken softly with a veneer of concern, often preceded hurtful outbursts. I found myself replaying the day our marriage truly fell apart. We had just found out that I was pregnant. Initially, Greg seemed happy, but little things began to set him off more frequently. As my pregnancy progressed, his irritability turned into aggression. Then the night of the miscarriage came. The pain, both physical and emotional, was unbearable. I remembered clearly how, instead of consoling me, he had blamed me. "This is your fault." He spat, standing over me as I cried, "You couldn't even manage to do this right." His words cut deeper than any wound, leaving scars that took years to heal. Therapy became my lifeline after the divorce. I found myself in sessions multiple times a week, rebuilding the fragments of my shattered self-esteem. I was determined to move forward, not just for myself, but for the hope of a better future. Then Ethan came into my life, an attorney with a gentle heart and a firm sense of justice. He saw the real me, beyond the broken pieces Greg had left behind. Our relationship grew steadily, rooted in mutual respect and love, far removed from the toxicity of my past. Sitting back in my living room now, surrounded by the warmth of our home, I felt miles away from the person I was with Greg. But his words from today echoed in my mind. "I hope you're ready for what's coming, Emily." Ethan came in from the kitchen carrying a cup of tea. "Thought this might help," he said, offering it to me with a smile. "Thanks," I murmured, taking it gratefully. Today brought back a lot. Ethan sat down beside me, his concern clear. I can't imagine how hard that was for you, seeing him again. But you need to know, we'll get through this. Together. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Ethan's support meant everything, especially now. I've come so far from where I was with him, I said, my voice steady. I can't let him pull me back. And he won't, Ethan reassured, his hand covering mine. We'll face whatever comes our way. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean into that hope. My past with Greg had its shadows, but my present reality was brighter, stronger. Greg's threats loomed, but they were no match for the life and love I had rebuilt. One step at a time, I whispered, more to myself than to Ethan. We've got this, he replied softly, his words a promise. As I sipped my tea, I felt a sense of calm. No matter what Greg threw our way, I wasn't alone. This battle, just like the past, would be faced head-on, leaving no room for old fears. The next day, I sat in the waiting room of the clinic again, Ethan by my side. I tried to focus on the soft music playing overhead, but my mind was elsewhere, anticipating seeing Greg, hoping I wouldn't. But it seemed fate had other plans. Greg walked in, eyes scanning until he locked onto me. His lips curled into a cruel smile. "Emily," he said loudly, striding over, ignoring the uncomfortable looks from other patients. I tensed, feeling Ethan's reassuring hand on my back. Greg wasted no time. "So, decided to show up after all. Brave of you," he sneered. "Greg, what do you want?" Ethan asked calmly, his tone protective. "Oh, nothing much," Greg responded, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just curious about how my ex-wife is holding up, especially at her age. Getting pregnant again? Risky, don't you think?" Ethan stood up, trying to stay calm. "Leave now, Greg." Ignoring him, Greg leaned in closer to me. "You must be desperate, Emily. Didn't think anyone would want you after everything." I stood up, my anger flaring. "Leave us alone, Greg. Whatever issue you have, it's over. I'm done with you." Greg's face twisted in malign pleasure. "Done? You think it's that simple? I made you this strong. Don't forget that. Without me, you're nothing." "Step back," Ethan said sharply, stepping between us. "You need to go now." Greg chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Or what? You think you can scare me? I'm a surgeon, Ethan. I don't play by your rules." Ethan didn't move. "This is a place for peace, Greg. You're disturbing everyone here. Leave or we'll ask for help." Just then, Dr. Sandra Brown emerged and saw the tension. "Is there a problem?" she asked, moving towards us. Greg scoffed. "No problem. Just a little reunion. Isn't that right, Emily?" His sarcasm was palpable. "We were just leaving," I said, grabbing Ethan's hand, ready to walk away. But Greg's last words stopped us. "You think this ends here? It doesn't. You have no idea what's coming." Turning abruptly, we stepped out of the clinic, my heart pounding. Ethan looked at me, concern written all over his face. "Are you okay?" "Barely," I admitted. "He won't let go." "He's just trying to scare you," Ethan said firmly. "He's a bully. We'll handle him." "He's relentless," I whispered, "and vengeful. And we're resilient," Ethan reminded me. His words, though strong, couldn't completely quell my fears. As we walked to the car, Ethan's grip on my hand tightened. "We'll take legal action, Emily. Restraining order, whatever we have to do. He won't win." I nodded, grateful but still shaken. Greg's threats weren't empty words. But one thing was clear. We had to stand strong together, no matter what came our way. Back at the clinic the following week, tension hung heavy in the air. I sat next to Ethan, trying to remain calm as we waited for my appointment. Suddenly there was a commotion at the entrance, and I saw Greg pushing his way in, ignoring the glares and murmurings from other patients. "You again," he called out, eyes narrowing as they fixed on me. "I thought you'd have the sense to avoid this place." Ethan rose, placing himself protectively between Greg and me. "Greg, this is not the time or place. You need to leave." Greg stepped closer, his face contorted with anger. "And who are you to tell me what to do? You think just because you're her husband now, you have some kind of power over me?" Rebecca, the receptionist, picked up the phone, her eyes wide with alarm. "Security is on their way," she said as calmly as she could manage. Greg ignored her, directing venomous words at Ethan. "You really think you can protect her from me? You're just as naive as she is." Ethan remained firm, his voice level. "We've dealt with enough of your threats. Leave now before things get worse for you." Greg's eyes flashed dangerously. "Worse? You don't know the meaning of the word." At that moment, John Michaels, the clinic's security guard, arrived, his presence a comforting sight. Is there a problem here? He asked, looking between Ethan and Greg. This man is causing trouble, Ethan said, pointing at Greg. He needs to leave. Greg scoffed. I'm not going anywhere, not until I say what I need to. John stepped forward, his stance authoritative. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now. Greg's face twisted with rage. You think you can just make me leave? I have rights. You're disturbing other patients and staff, John stated firmly. Leave now, or I'll escort you out myself. For a moment it looked like Greg might resist, a fury bubbling just beneath the surface. Then, with a final vicious glare at me and Ethan, he spat, This isn't over, Emily. I'll ruin you both. Mark my words. As John escorted Greg out, a tense silence filled the waiting room. I could feel the eyes of other patients on us, but I focused on Ethan's calming presence. Dr. Sandra Brown appeared, her expression concerned. Are you all right, Emily? I nodded shakily. Just shaken up. Ethan turned to Dr. Brown. We're considering getting a restraining order against him. This harassment has to stop. Dr. Brown placed a hand on my shoulder. We'll support you however we can. As I sat down for my appointment, I couldn't shake off Greg's final threat. But seeing Ethan's supportive gaze and feeling the solidarity from the clinic staff, I knew we had a fighting chance. John came back in, giving us a reassuring nod. He's gone for now, but we'll keep an eye out. I took Ethan's hand, squeezing it tightly. We'll face this together, I said softly. Always, he replied, his voice filled with determination. The battle wasn't over, but we were no longer alone in it, and that made all the difference. That night, I sat on the couch while Ethan paced the living room. The encounter with Greg gnawed at both of us. Ethan paused, looking at me intently. We should definitely get a restraining order. His threats aren't just empty talk. I nodded, feeling the weight of the day pressing on me. You're right, we need to protect ourselves, but what if he finds a way around it? Greg's always been relentless. Ethan sat down beside me, taking my hand. We'll do everything we can. The restraining order is step 1. We'll document everything and be prepared for any potential legal battle. My mind buzzed with thoughts of Greg's threats. I'm worried, Ethan. He won't stop until he's satisfied. What if he tries to harm you or the baby? Ethan's grip tightened. We'll talk to a lawyer first thing tomorrow. We'll create a safety plan. You and the baby's safety are my top priority. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's an unknown number, he muttered, answering it. Within seconds, his face darkened. Whoever this is, stop calling. After hanging up, he turned to me. Seems like Greg is already trying to mess with us. We need to act fast. The sensation of dread washed over me. Greg's vendetta wasn't just about inconveniencing us. It was personal and vicious. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my resolve. We've come too far, Ethan. I won't let him drag us back down. Ethan nodded. Exactly. We won't let him win. We have people who care about us. We'll fight this together. The next I consulted with a lawyer recommended by Ethan's firm. After explaining our situation, the lawyer, Mrs. Collins, leaned forward, her expression serious. Greg's behavior constitutes harassment. We'll file for a restraining order immediately, but we'll also explore additional protective measures. That's a relief, I said, feeling a small weight lift. Thank you. This isn't your burden alone, Ethan reassured, squeezing my hand. Mrs. Collins continued. Document every contact, every incident. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Ethan wrapped his arm around me. We've started the process. Now we stay vigilant. As we walked to the car, my phone buzzed with a message. I unlocked it to find a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Emily. You'll regret crossing me. I showed Ethan, my hands trembling slightly. He's not stopping. We'll forward this to Mrs. Collins, Ethan said, his jaw set. Let him dig his own grave. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. Do you think he'll ever stop? I asked. Ethan looked thoughtful. Greg's behavior is about control. We're taking that away from him. He's bound to escalate before he falls. I nodded, feeling a sense of dread, but also determination. Then we face whatever comes next, together. Together, Ethan echoed, raising his glass, to our strength. I clinked mine against his, the resolve in my heart matching the steel in Ethan's gaze. We weren't going to be victims. Not anymore. A few days passed, but the sense of foreboding never left. Ethan and I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but Greg's threats lingered like a dark cloud. One evening, as we sat in the living room, our phones began to buzz with numerous messages and calls. Ethan picked up his phone, frowning. "Unknown number again," he muttered, answering on speaker. "Hello? Thought you could hide?" Greg's voice sneered through the line. "I'm everywhere, Ethan. You can't escape me." Ethan's expression hardened. "This is harassment, Greg. We've already taken legal action." Greg laughed, a cold, unsettling sound. "Legal action? Do you honestly believe that will stop me?" I gripped Ethan's hand, trying to keep calm. After hanging up, Ethan looked at me. "We need to tell Mrs. Collins about this. It's getting out of hand." The next morning, we met with Mrs. Collins to report the latest incident. She listened attentively, her expression determined. "This is building a strong case for the restraining order. Keep documenting everything." We left her office, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. At home, I tried to distract myself by preparing the nursery. Ethan joined me, painting the walls a soft yellow. "In a few months, our little one will be here," Ethan said, his voice full of hope. "We'll be ready for anything." But as the days went by, Greg's harassment escalated. We found anonymous notes on our doorstep, received threatening emails, and even had unsettling encounters with strangers who seemed to know too much about our lives. Greg clearly had extended his reach, and it was affecting my mental health. Nights were filled with restless sleep, and my stress began to take a toll on the pregnancy. One particularly difficult night, Ethan sat beside me as I wrestled with a bout of anxiety. "Emily, we'll get through this. Remember, we're not alone. We have support." His words were comforting, but the constant fear weighed heavily. The next morning, I found myself barely functioning. Ethan, seeing the toll it was taking on me, took decisive action. "We're going to see Dr. Brown. She needs to know what's going on and how it's affecting you." At the clinic, Dr. Brown listened as we relayed the ongoing harassment. She looked grave. "Stress can have serious effects on the pregnancy. Let's explore some options to help you manage it." She suggested a combination of therapy and support groups. "You're facing intense psychological pressure. Don't underestimate the value of a strong support system." Leaving the clinic, I felt slightly better. Ethan was resolute. "This isn't just about legal action anymore. We need to focus on your health and the baby's well-being." His words resonated deeply. We enrolled in a counseling program and joined a support group for stalking victims. Sharing my story with others who had faced similar fears brought a sense of solidarity and strength. As days turned into weeks, the threat of Greg loomed, but we refused to let him dominate our lives. Every laugh, every shared moment of peace was a victory. And through it all, Ethan's unwavering support made each step forward possible. Greg's attempts to destabilize us continued, but with every threat, our determination grew. We were not just fighting against his malice, we were fighting for our future, our family. And that fight was far from over. Ethan and I arrived at the fundraiser, the venue buzzing with chatter and laughter. It was supposed to be a night of networking and support for a charitable cause close to my heart, but as we mingled through the crowd, my eyes constantly scanned for any sign of Greg. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Try to relax, Emily. We're surrounded by friends and colleagues. Greg knows better than to cause a scene here." But as if on cue, Greg appeared, swaggering through the entrance as though he owned the place. My stomach knotted. He spotted us almost immediately and made a beeline towards us, a malicious grin plastered on his face. Well, look who decided to show up," Greg said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Greg and me. "This is neither the time nor the place. Leave, Greg." Greg laughed loudly, drawing the attention of everyone around us. "You think you're in control here? That's adorable." Before Ethan could respond, Greg raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that Ethan Patterson's law firm has built its success on unethical practices?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning towards us. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You're crossing a line, Greg." Greg's smirk widened. "Oh, come on, Ethan. Don't act so surprised. Everyone has skeletons in their closet." The tension was palpable. I saw Ethan's friends and colleagues exchanging worried glances. Greg's words hung in the air, creating an electric atmosphere of distrust and curiosity. At that moment, a tall man stepped forward from the crowd. David Lewis, a former colleague of Greg's. He looked directly at Greg, his voice calm but firm. "Enough, Greg. Your lies and deceit have gone on long enough." Greg's smile faltered. "David, what are you?" David cut him off, his voice ringing with authority. "Everyone, listen up. Greg has been involved in fraudulent activities for years. I have evidence that proves he's committed medical malpractice and worse." Gasps filled the room. Greg's face turned pale as David continued. "He's under investigation by the medical board. His vendetta against Ethan and Emily is nothing more than a desperate attempt to distract from his own crimes." Greg's mask of confidence shattered. He looked around, realizing the crowd wasn't buying his story anymore. They were looking at him with disdain and disbelief. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Greg. Your lies have caught up with you." Greg's eyes blazed with anger. "This isn't over," he spat, but the conviction in his voice was gone. David approached us, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I've been wanting to expose him for a long time. I'm sorry you got caught in his web." "Thank you, David," Ethan replied, gratefulness evident in his tone. As security escorted Greg out, the room slowly returned to normal, though the air was still thick with tension. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Greg's power was crumbling, his threats losing their edge. Ethan turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and exhaustion. "We did it, Emily. We stood our ground." I nodded, feeling the weight of the ordeal begin to lift. "We aren't just survivors, Ethan. We're fighters." "That we are," he agreed, wrapping his arm around me. As we left the fundraiser, I looked back one last time, seeing the faces of those who stood by us. Greg's reign of terror was crumbling, and with every step forward I felt stronger, more certain that brighter days lay ahead. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the fallout from Greg's exposed deceit spread rapidly. Newspaper articles, social media posts, and news broadcasts highlighted his malpractice and fraudulent activities. The medical board launched a thorough investigation, and Greg's career unraveled like an old, fraying thread. Ethan and I sat on the couch one evening, the TV displaying the latest news about Greg's downfall. "Greg Taylor, once a respected surgeon, now faces multiple charges," the anchor reported. "His actions have not only tarnished his reputation, but have also brought justice for those he wronged." Ethan looked at me, a mixture of relief and triumph in his eyes. "He's finally getting what he deserves." I nodded, still trying to process everything. I never thought I'd see this day. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Turn on the local news. It's about Greg." We switched the channel, and there was Greg, being led away in handcuffs, his expression a mix of rage and defeat. "Greg Taylor has been arrested following a comprehensive investigation," the reporter said. "His downfall marks a significant victory for his victims." Ethan took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You did it, Emily. You faced your fears and won." Tears welled up in my eyes, not of sadness but of relief. "We did it, Ethan. Together." A few weeks later, as the legal proceedings against Greg continued, I found myself in the hospital. Only this time it wasn't out of fear or distress, but because our baby was coming. Ethan stayed by my side, his presence a calming anchor as I brought new life into the world. Hours later, with the sound of our baby's first cries filling the room, I looked at Ethan, exhausted but overjoyed. "We did it," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening. "Welcome to the world, little one," he said softly, cradling our newborn. As we settled into our new life with our baby, the shadow of Greg's influence faded. Emily and Ethan Patterson, no longer defined by the past but empowered by the future. Greg's threats had once loomed over us like a storm cloud, but now his downfall was the poetry of justice. The final news report we watched detailed Greg's sentencing. Greg Taylor has been convicted of multiple charges, including medical malpractice and fraud. He will serve a lengthy prison sentence. Ethan turned to me, his expression serious but soft. "This is it. It's finally over." I nodded. Closure at last. The journey had been grueling, but standing by my side every step of the way had made all the difference. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden hue over our peaceful home, I stood by the window, holding our baby close. Ethan wrapped his arms around us, kissing the top of my head. We made it through, stronger than ever. "Yes," I replied, my heart full. "We're free." Greg's collapse had brought poetic justice, but it was our resilience, our unyielding spirit that had truly set us free. Our past was a chapter closed, our future a story yet to be written. And with Ethan and our baby, I knew it would be a beautiful one.